ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरम् तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। Shivam friends, today we are going to take the reading of chapter 44 of Upasna Kand, and in this chapter the story of Gadhi, his tap, Vishnu's boon and his death is discussed. Now Vasishtha is saying, Ram, only government of the restless mind is able to destroy the delusion which causes the interminable reincarnations in this mortal world. There is no other means to this end. Listen attentively, O sinless Ram, to the story, to this story which I am going to relate to you in order to show you the intricacies of understanding the nature of worldly delusions. In this land, there is the large district of Koshal, which is full of forest and fruitful trees like gardens of wish-fulfilling kalp trees and abounding with minerals like Sumeru mountain. There lived a learned Brahman named Gadhi who was intelligent and versed in Vedas and an image of virtues. From his youth he continued with the calmness of his mind, abstracted from and indifferent to worldly affairs. He was a pure and unstained soul like the clear sky above. Intent on some fixed purpose of his mind, he left the company of his friends and went to a forest to perform austere tapas. There he found a lake filled with full-blown lotuses, the moon shining in the sky with scattered stars about her, all shedding their brightness like showers of rain. He went down into the lake and stood in the waters up to his neck. His body was below water and his head floated over it like a lotus. He stood upon his tap, intent with a view to have the sight of Vishnu present before him. When he passed full 8 months, his body immersed in the water of the lake. His face was shriveled and wan, like the lotuses of his lake for lack of sunshine. When he was emancipated by his austerities, his god Vishnu appeared before him like a dark cloud of rainy weather, appearing over the parched earth of the hot season. The Lord said, Rise, O Brahman, from the water and receive your desired blessing of me. The tree of your tap, woe, is now flowering with its expected fruit. The Brahmin replied, I bow to you, O my Lord Vishnu. You are the receptacle of the three worlds and the reservoir of innumerable starry worlds, which rise like lotuses in the lake of your heart, whereon you sit like a black bee. My Lord, I want to see the spiritual delusion which you have ordained to blindfold this world and which is known as Vishnu Maya. Vasishtha said. To this the god replied, You shall truly behold this delusion and get rid of it afterwards by virtue of your devotion in tap. Saying so, the god disappeared from his sight like a castle in the sky. Vishnu being gone, the good Brahman got up from his watery bed like the fair and humid moon rises from the cool and whitey milky ocean. He was glad in his soul at the sight of the Lord of world. His heart was full blown with joy, like kumud lotuses unfolding at the sight of the moon. Then he passed some days in that forest, overjoyed in his mind by the sight of Vishnu, and employed himself in discharging his Brahman duties. Only when he had been bathing in the lake covered with full-blown lotuses, he thought upon the words of Vishnu like great sages reflecting upon the meanings of the Vedas. Then, while discharging his priestly functions in the sacred water, he made his mental prayer to purge his sins. As he was performing this act in the water, he chanced to forget his sacred prayers, became confused, and was drawn in deep water. He thought that this body had fallen down like a mountain tree in the valley below by a blast of wind, and that his dead corpse was taken up and mourned over by his friends. He thought that his vital breath had fled from his being, and the limbs of his body were as motionless as sugarcane flattened by a hurricane. He thought his face had faded away and grown as pale as the withered leaf of a tree, and that this body had turned into a carcass and was lying on the ground like a lotus bud torn from his stalk. His eyeballs were as dull and dim as the stars are shorn of their beams with the morning. The ground seemed to be as dry to him, filled with flying dust everywhere, as if there was a drought. He believed his dead body was beset all about by his kind friends, weeping upon it with sad and sorrowful faces, loudly lamenting and crying over it like birds upon trees. He thought his faithful wife was sitting at his feet like a handsome lotus flower, weeping profusely with showers of tears from her lotus like eyes, like waters rushing through a broken embankment. His sorrowful mother, with her loud wailing and mourning crying, was buzzing like a humming bee and holding her chin, newly overgrown with whiskers, in her tender hand. His friends were sitting by his side with dejected looks, trickling tears dropping down their faces and cheeks. These washed his dead body like melting dew on withered leaves moisten the parent tree. His body members ceased to befriend him, like strangers who decline to become friends for fear of future separation, or turning unfriendly ever afterwards in life. The open lips, leaving the teeth bare, seemed to be deride the vanity of human life, as the white and bony tooth ascetics and cynics do at unsteadiness of the worldly events. His mouth was speechless, like that of a devotee in meditation. His body was motionless, as if of mud and clay. It slept to wake no more, like a sage absorbed in his meditation. It remained quiet with lifted ears, as if to listen to the cries and wailings of mourning friends, in order to judge the degrees of their affection and grief for him. Then the relatives raised their loud lamentations with sobbing and beating of breasts, swooning and rising, and shedding floods of tears from their leaky eyes. Afterwards, the sorrowful relations removed the disgusting corpse with their bitter cries for its funeral, to never see it again in his passing world. They bore the body to the funeral ground with its rotten flesh and entrails, daubed all over with mud and dust. They placed it on the ground, strewn with unnumbered bones, skeletons, and dried and rotten carcasses. Flights of flying vultures shaded the sunbeams on high, and burning funeral pyres drove away the darkness below. The fearful glare of open-mouthed jackals flashed on all sides like flames of living fire. Ravens bathed in floods of blood, and crows dipped their wings in it. Hungry birds tore at entrails, and old vultures were trapped in the strings. The friends of the dead burned the corpse in the funeral flame and reduced it to ashes. The moisture of the body flew in fumes like the waters of the ocean evaporates from an undersea fire. The burning wood of the funeral pyre consumed the dead body with loud cracking noises. The dry fuel of the pile flashed in encompassing flames with curling smoke over them. The devouring fire gnawed down the bones with crackling noise and filled the atmosphere with filthy stink and stank. It gorged up all that was soft or hard, like an elephant devouring reeds with the moisture contained in their cellular vessels. With, and in the next chapter 45, Gadhi reborn as a tribal, then made Gavala king of Kirapura. Vashiji said, then Gadhi, standing as he was in the water, with his sorrowful heart, saw many other occurrences in the clarity of his mind. He saw a village in the vicinity of Bhoot district full of inhabitants, and then he was reborn there in the womb of a tribal woman, in which he remained with great pains. Confined in the cavity of the womb, he felt his body pressed by the pressure of her intestines, while his senses were sorely annoyed by being forced to abide the stink of the odor and filth in the intestinal parts of the tribal woman. After the fetus matured, he was born in proper time with a black complexion, like a dark cloud in rainy season, and soiled with filth all over his body. He grew up to the childhood and then to boyhood in the tribal woman's house and moved about here and there like a pebble thrown up by a current of Yamuna river. He reached his 12th, then his 16th year of age, and his body fully developed like a rain cloud increasing in size. Then, accompanied by a pack of hounds, the lad wandered from one forest to another, hunting and killing wild deer in his occupation of a hunter. He was joined then with a tribal wife as black as the leaf of tamala plant, and who, with her budding breasts, swarthy hands and palms, resembled the newly sprouting stalks and leaves of trees. She was black and swarthy in her whole complexion, except her two rows of milk white teeth. All of her limbs were as lively and supple as the tender vines of the forest. They played together at the edge of the forest in their youthful dalliance, and they wandered about the flowery meadows like a couple of black bees. When tired, they took their seats on beds of leaves and vines, spread over the plains by driving winds, like those scattered over the environs of Vindhya hills. They rested in woodlands, gardens, and slept in mountain caves. They sat on heaps of leaflets and lived under shrubberies and covered shelters of creeping plants. They decorated their heads with kinkirat flowers and their necks and bosoms with blossoms of various kinds. They hung ketak flowers from their ears and made necklaces of small amra flowers. They rolled on beds of flowers and rode about the foot of the mountain. They knew all the tree where to play, and they were skilled in archery and hunting deer. In the hilly region, they produced many children as the descendants of their race. They were as rude and rough as the prickly thorns of the khadira plant. After passing their youth in family life, they came gradually to their decay and decline until at last they were overtaken by decrepit old age, which was as dry of pleasure as a parched desert. Then, returning to their native village in Bhoot district, they built a poor hut of leaves and straws for themselves and lived there as hermits. Gadhi found his body worn out with age, grown as thin and lean as a dry leaf, and like a withered tamara tree growing in a mountain cave, which for lack of moisture soon dwindles into decrepitude. He saw his family of savages increasing in numbers and himself becoming reduced in means and irritated in his speech in his extreme old age. Gadhi found himself to be the oldest man alive among the savages. In his dotage, his comfort was in the members of his family, but at last he saw all his family swept away by the cruel hand of death as rainwater carries away fallen leaves of the forest. He continued to lament over their loss, his heart rent with sorrow, and his eyes drenched in tears, like those of a male deer separated from its companions. Thus, passing some days in that forest with his heart overcome with grief, at last he left the land of his birth, as aquatic fowls quit their native lake when its waters and lotus plants are dried up. He traveled through many countries with his sad and sick heart, without finding a place to rest. He was driven to and fro like a cloud carried by contrary winds. At one time he entered the opulent city of Kira. He observed birds flying over it like so many balloons hanging in the air. There he saw rows of trees on both sides of road, waving their variegated leaves and clusters of flowers like enameled cloths and gems. The road was strewn with beautiful flowers of various kinds up to the heels. Then he came to the royal road that looked like the milky path of heaven. He found it filled with soldiers and citizens and their women without number. There he saw the auspicious royal elephant decorated with shining and embroidered trapping, appearing like the golden mountain of the gods moving on earth. He learned that elephants were rambling about in search of a new king to be elected in place of the last king who had recently died. The royal elephant was employed as a jeweler to select the best gem to be placed on the royal throne. The savage gazed steadily at the elephant with a curious eye and found it to be no other than a hill in motion. As he was looking on it with amazement, the elephant came to him and lifted him with his trunk and respectfully set him on his head, bearing him as Mount Meru bears the sun on its top. Seeing him sitting on the animal's head, the people sounded their trumpets. The noise was as loud as that of the ocean crashing on the roaring of antediluvian clouds in the sky. Then shouts of victory to the king rose from the assembled throng and filled the air. It seemed as if they were the united cries morning birds all over the waking world. Next rose the loud voices of the eulogists that moved in the air like the dashing waves of the sea. Then women joined to anoint him as their king, moving about him like waves of the sea surrounding Mandara mountain after its labor of journey. The respectable ladies adorned him with many ornaments of various gems, like the sea washes rocks of its shore with the many colored waves under the beams of the rising sun. Youthful maidens poured cooling ointments on him, like rain clouds pour their waters on mountain tops. Other women used their tender hands to decorate his body with garlands of fragrant flowers, just as a spring season with her hands adorns the forest with a variety of tender stalks, branches, and flowers. They put a great many paints and paste upon his body, which decorated it like the rays of the sun paints a mountain with the many colors of its minerals. His body, decorated with ornaments made of gems and gold, attracted all hearts to him, just as the variegated clouds of evening shining upon Mount Meru is attractive to all hearts. He was adorned by the beautiful maids with shoots of creeping plants, which gave him the appearance of wish-fulfilling culp tree and twinned by its vines. Being thus anointed and decorated, all the royal family and subjects attending upon him like travelers resting under a shady and flowering tree. They all assembled and installed him on the throne, just as the gods join together to place Indra on the throne after he is born on the back of his elephant Airavat. In this manner, the tribal was made a king in the city of Kira. He was much overjoyed at his unexpected good fortune, like a raven delighted to find a stout dead deer in the forest. His feet was rubbed by the lotus-like hands of the queen of Kira. His body daubed with scented powder of frankincense, which gave it the bright appearance of evening with its crimson clouds. He paraded in Kira city in the midst of their women like a lion strutting in the company of lionesses in a flowery forest. Now he forgot his former pains and sorrows. His body was much cooled by wearing a necklace of pearls as if dropped from the heads of the elephant killed by lions. He took great delight at the enjoyment of the luxuries in company with these good people, like a sunburned elephant is refreshed in a lake full of water and forage. He ruled for some time in his self-gotten kingdom of Kirapura. Having extended his power and mandates on all sides, he ruled the state through his ministers and became known by the name of Gavala throughout his dominions. Vasishtha continued thus Gadhi, surrounded by his courtiers, attended by his ministers, chiefs, paid their homage to him, and the royal umbrella was raised above his head, and the fan flapped about him. He attained great dignity on seeing his mandates carried out on every side. He was delighted to learn of a state of affairs and to be informed that his subjects were happy and lived with his dominion without fear. The, the paeans of the eulogist made him forget himself and his former state. The excesses of his delight made him as giddy as if intoxicated. He ruled for full 8 years over Kirapura kingdom and managed himself in an honorable manner throughout that time. Once he was sitting in the open air at his pleasure and without his royal clothing. He was looking at the clear sky devoid of clouds and darkness and without the light of the sun, moon, or stars. His heart was full with the enjoyment of royal dignity, but he didn't think much of the trinkets and ornaments that were loaded upon him. One time he went abroad in his undressed state of his body and saw that the setting sun bending his course below the horizon on his usual path of glory. There he saw a band of tribals with black complexions and big bodies singing like melodious cuckoos at the approach of spring season. They were plucking the strings of their lyres with trembling fingers, like a swarm of sweet sounding bees, shaking the trembling leaves of trees with their fluttering and buzzing. There stood an old man among them, who seemed to be the leader of the band. With his grey head and ruby eyes, he appeared like a Mount Meru with its snow covered top and shining caves. He approached the king, saying, "How is it, O Katanj, that you came to be here? Has the king of this place taken you for his associate on account of your skill in music? Does he have a liking for sweet songsters, as they do for the musical Kokila nightingales? Does he load his favors upon them with presents of households, clothes, and seats? I am as glad to see you here today as men are pleased to see a mango tree filled with flowers and fruit in spring. I am as glad in my heart as the budding lotus at the sight of the rising sun, and the medicinal plants at moonrise. As great men are pleased with their best skins, so I am pleased at seeing you here, because the highest limit of joy is the sight of a friend." As the tribal was addressing the king in this manner, the king explained how the wheel of time had turned into his favor. At this instant, the king's consorts and servants, who were standing at the window, overheard their conversation. They were in deep sorrow to learn that he was a tribal by birth. They were as sick at heart as lotus flowers under a shower of frost or a land under famine. Upon learning this, citizens were as cheerless as if they had seen the woods of the mountain on fire. The king hurled his defiance at the words of the old tribal. Like a lion lying on the ground, shows his teeth at the sneering of a cat on the top of a tree. He fled in haste into the inner apartment among its sorrowful residents with as much throbbing of his heart as a reluctant swan entering a lake of withering lotus in dry season. His limbs grew stiff and his face became pale with fear. His knees tottered with inner rage like tree trunks shaking with burning fire in their hollows. He saw everyone there sitting in a melancholy mood with downcast looks and drooping heads, like the bending tops of plants eaten at the root by mice and rats. The ministers, ladies of the harem, and all people of the city refrained from touching his body, just as they avoid touching a dead body lying in the house. Servants ceased to minister him, and ladies, despite all their previous love and sorrow for him, loathed his company. They looked upon his cheerless face and dark complexion with its departed brightness, as if it was a corpse in a funeral ground, which everyone loathes to look upon. Though the pupil sorrowed for his dark body, now smoking with fumes of his own grief, yet they dared not approach his body, which appeared to burn like a volcano amidst its smoke. Courtiers left him with their hearts heaving. His orders were no longer obeyed any more than those of quenching the cool ashes with water. People fled from him like from a horrible Rakshas demon who is the cause of only evil and danger. Thus was he shunned by all and left alone in the populous city. He became like friendless traveler passing through a foreign country without money or skill to support him. Though he called and approached everybody, he got no answer from anyone, like a hollow sounding reed never receives a reply from any passerby. They all said to one another that the guilt of their long association with the tribal could not be expiated by any penance other than burning themselves alive on the funeral pile. Being so resolved, ministers and citizens all joined together and raised their piles with heaps of dry wood. These, being lit, blazed all about the ground like stars in the sky. The city was filled with the loud wailings of people. Wailing wives shed showers of tears with loud and piteous cries all about the burning furnaces. Weeping people heaved heavy groans and choked voices. The plaintive cries of the self-immolating ministers' dependents rose like the swell of whistling winds amidst forest trees. The bodies of great Brahmins burning on pyres sent forth their fetid fumes in the air. The smoke scattered by winds hung over the landscape like a potential mist. The winds bore the stank of men's burning fat and flesh far and wide in the open sky, inviting flocks of birds to the feast. The disk of the sun was hidden under the white shadow of the winged tribe. The flames of burning pyres carried by the winds to the sky burned like a conflagration on high. Flying sparks scattered in the air appeared like falling meteors blazing in the horizon. Helpless children were crying for their ornaments being robbed by atrocious robbers. They had no guardians. Citizens were threatened with the loss of both their lives and properties by violent thieves. On one side, people lamented the loss of their relatives, on the other were bands of thieves lurking and searching unobserved about houses for plunder and booty. As adverse fate brought on this dire change on the devoted city, its horrified residents remained in mute amazement like on the final doomsday of creation. Gavala, the tribal prince, whose mind was purified and whose manners were refined in the society of the great man of the palace, witnessed the sad catastrophe of the state and mourned with a pensive heart. It is all owing to me, he thought. that all this sorrow has befallen on this estate, and that time has brought on the untimely dissolution of the doomsday on this king's kingdom, the royal family and its ministerial officers. What is the good of this miserable life of mine? My death is a blessing to me rather than living in this wretched state. It is better for the man, for the mean and base to die than to live and be reviled by others. Thus resolved, Gavala prepared a funeral pyre for himself and made an offering of his body in the burning furnace without betraying a sigh, like a poor moth dropping on fire. As Gavala cast his body into the flames and was pulling his limbs, signed by the fire, their violent motion and his painful emotion roused the dreaming Gadhi from his reverie in the water. Valmiki said, as the sage was saying these things, the day departed with the setting sun to its evening devotion. The congregation broke with mutual salutations to perform of their evening ceremonial baths. They assembled again with the rising sun after dispersion of the gloom of night. So this was all up to the chapter 46, and we will rest today's reading session here itself. We'll again meet to carry on further reading of this Upasna chapter 47 onwards. Until then, Shivoham friends, we will meet again surely with the grace of Lord Ram. Shivoham.